I also like how you put D&D and B&B in the same conversation. So how are you specifically repurposing this content, and what's working there and what's not?
Generally, short form is where we're repurposing. You have your pillar content, very much the Gary Vee model, things like that, and you can slice and dice a number of different things out of it.
Welcome to the Digital Accomplice video podcast. Today, I'm joined by Rob Conlon, who is the founder of Westport Studios, which is a B2B podcast production partner. Welcome to the show.
Dane, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to get into it. So I like to start out with this nice, easy one. What would be a recent content marketing success that you've enjoyed?
Ooh, it's maybe not like a last week kind of thing, but when we first kicked over to like video first, which is something we do for our customers, we don't just make an audio version of our podcasts. When we first realized that like we could actually make our customers more content and better content by literally turning our process on its head and running it backwards, like that was the incredible moment of like, oh, this actually works better when you put it the other way, like like literally turning something around in a slot. Very funny. So that's what I would say is the big win, getting more content out of the same amount of effort by turning a process around.
Yeah, that was a big eye opener for me. I crossed that river recently too, so that was pretty mind blowing. So then, on the other end of the spectrum, what would be like your biggest marketing challenge right now, and what are you doing about it?
Ooh, well, I want to grow my business, and I would say that is, that's a challenge of, you don't want to be just like, I need new customers or things like that, because that's not where I'm at. I love where I'm at, but I would like to get my business to about 40 companies that I work with. And the biggest challenge for me being a remote business in a small metropolitan area is that not all my customers are here. Milwaukee, Wisconsin is not exactly a tech hub or a place that people are like, oh yeah, we're going to found a earth-shattering business or something like that. So connecting with folks, whether it's virtually or I just was telling you before we hit record here, in person, I went down to Fort Worth, Texas last week, and I don't have enough fingers and toes to tell you how many people who I would A, love to work with, but B, that I could probably really help. So that's what I'm doing, getting that in-person kind of branding and marketing and speaking on stages. That's the other thing that I'm getting ramped up as well.
Nice. That sounds like a good one. So then, this one's pretty obvious, but I want to get deeper into it. What are you doing with video now, and what would you like to be? So I know you're doing video first podcasts, but like maybe what are we going to do to sort of expand on that?
So for that, I would love to see us in the future we have things that are YouTube ready, but I'd like to see them YouTube optimized, number one. And then number two, I would like to see us be a little bit more fun with our content. And I actually just set up an experiment for that the other day. One of my videographers is very talented. And I said, hey, you know what? We make some very, B2B content can be fun, but it's often very straight laced, even if it's kind of fun or funny. It's not as bombastic perhaps as some of the other content out there. And what I wanted to do with him was say, okay, I want you to take one of my old videos and here is 2 hours or here's an hour or two of your time, pay you for that and go nuts. Like whatever that means to you to make that piece of content really pop. And we've been using a lot of, without sounding like we don't put the human touch in our podcasts, AI assistance is great because it saves a lot of time and it lets us kind of take the best and leave the rest, which is just great. Or it stimulates ideas up here for us to use as humans. And so I think that is the direction I want to go, is to create these shorter form videos that are A, very informative, which is where we're good at right now, but also B, like on the other side of the fun fence, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So you kind of already got us into my next question. What are you doing with AI? What's working and what's not? But maybe we could get a little deeper into kind of
Yeah.
the nitty gritty there.
Yeah, so AI, I have the biggest, Dan, I have the biggest love-hate relationship with AI. Like the fact that I can ask it, like for that little video project I was mentioning, like, hey AI, I want to do this, and this, and I'd like you to help me suggest some pieces of content that could pop on the screen or things like that. Can you give me just some ideas? And for the experiment, it's perfect because I just need something to show to see if this is more impactful. But as I look through it, I'm wondering if I make 10 of those videos, is it going to suggest the same blue starburst at the beginning? I feel like AI has gotten kind of samey, and I don't know if that's from something like model degradation or things like that, but it's one of those things where using AI in content production is a great boon. It's super helpful. I use it for everything from my day job making podcasts for other companies to making a better and more creative world when I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. Like, create me 10 townspeople for our game. Like, the blacksmith is, 6'8" and he's a hulking person. His name is Bjarn. Like, that's really cool. He has a daughter that he loves, and you get all into this stuff. But the question is, again, if I ask for another town, is Bjarn going to be there? You know what I mean? And I think for content creation in the B2B space, even if it's not for something fun, like I mentioned with D&D, uh, is that going to get samey? And I think that is really the thing that I've seen a lot of in the B2B space, is that it feels very wooden. Doesn't quite cover it, Dane, but it feels very repetitive. And that's where I really try to walk a fine line with our company to go, yes, we use AI to help us ideate, generate, create, support, make a better cut. If audio is garbage, smooth that stuff out. Um, or B, do we actually put the human heart and soul in that? Now, what I found is that about AI can get us about 70% of the way, which is awesome. But I think it makes that last third really much more important for people who are making content.
Interesting. I also like how you put D&D and B&B in the same conversation. So somehow put those together.
D&D, B2B,
Yeah.
yep.
So how are you specifically repurposing this content, and what's working there and what's not?
So generally short form is where we're repurposing. You have your pillar content, very much the Gary V model, things like that. And you can slice and dice a number of different things out of it. A lot of our stuff goes on just onto LinkedIn. Very, again, fairly straight laced. But what we found is the more that we can break out those smaller, more quippy pieces and have them be especially with human faces. This is kind of the interesting thing we've really learned, and that we've worked with some of our customers, particularly higher ed industry. Very unusual. We don't necessarily work with universities, but we work with companies that are adjacent to universities that help them out, basically. Two of our customers, when we suggested that they do short form videos focusing on human faces and swapping between the host and guest and allowing people to build the relationship with the host first, because that's probably who they're following on LinkedIn, we found about a 3 to 4 fold increase in the views that those videos would get, which is just awesome. So, putting some rough numbers to this so that somebody who's listening is able to realize this. If I had a video that on a normal day on LinkedIn with my higher ed marketing host would pull in 220 views, they were probably pulling in somewhere north of 800 views with this new style of, hey, you recognize me, the host, you know that I host this show, who's going to come up on the back end? And we're trying to evolve that a little bit with sometimes the stacked on top of each other, and then moving to uh, the guest in this case, so that you have the host as a reference point, but the guest is still along for the ride. And that's something that we've found has worked really well. And we're very excited. And going into 2025, especially with one of our largest customers, they run 16 shows with us, I think, if I last count, that we're looking to take all of their shows, which are primarily audio only right now, and move them to this new model, which will be just a colossal tidal wave of content for them on LinkedIn, and help them dominate their niche of, like, hey, if you are in the higher ed space and you need, they're a CRM for the higher ed space, and you need a CRM, we're the people.
Yeah, you're you're always one step ahead of me with these questions. I was going to ask you
Oh,
next
sorry.
about how you're measuring the content performance, but you already touched on that. The was it
Mhm.
3x performance by changing to the video faces
Yeah,
model?
3 to 3.5,
Yeah,
sometimes 4,
yeah.
again, in that neighborhood.
But then holistically, just across the board, how are you looking at content performance? What are your sort of what's your approach there?
So, Okay, so this is one where a lot of people in the podcast space will be like, "Oh, you need downloads and things like that." I say you don't. And that for some people is going to be like, "Wow, like why am I listening to this guy?" But here's the thing, listener, if you are listening to me right now and you're like, "This guy is nuts, he's not talking about downloads." We do B2B podcasting in a way that helps you make the friends with the people who can be your ideal customers. One of the most powerful networking tools on the face of the planet, Dane, is a podcast. You are sitting down, much like we are right now. And depending on who your ideal customer is, you could be spending 20, 30, 45 minutes, an hour, maybe not that much, with them one to one making content. And that's there's almost like I'll tell a little story because this kind of resonates with what this is. You're taking this person and you're putting them alongside you to make good content, and it forms a little bit of a trauma bond. I'm a rabbit dad. I have rabbits. When they were very young, there were two of them that did not get along, and it's an alpha beta kind of thing. One thought she was queen and the other was kind of the new girl in the house, which is fine. But one of the things that we read, and I don't know if I subscribe to this anymore 10 years down the road, but one of the things we read was to take your two rabbits and put them on the back seat of your car and go around your neighborhood, not fast, but just take the turns a little sharper than you would, just a little bit more abruptly than you would, and have them be just not whapped into the window or anything like that, but just give them a little bit of unbalance. Because when you have two creatures that are sharing a uncommon experience, whether they're humans or 3-pound rabbits, they look for a buddy. And the neat thing about that is that in creating content, it's a similar minor stressor to what the rabbits experienced when they were in the backseat of the car. And my wife is watching them over the passenger seat going, "Okay, you two." Like, eventually by the end of the car ride, the two of them huddled together, which was just really cute, and they were best friends for the rest of their lives,
Yeah,
which was really
war
adorable.
buddies.
Uh, kind of,
Yeah,
I suppose it is kind of that thing of common shared experiences, especially if they are stressful. And again, podcasting should never be like stressful, but you want to perform. I was on stage last week. Stress, yes. You stress, not de-stress in this case. And so I think that is the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that if you're consistent, in having people on your show every single week, week after week, that you can build those relationships, those small positive trauma bonds, if you will, with people that are going to be your ideal customer. It doesn't matter who's listening to that episode. Now, if you're lucky, it can, and you can get people who are also your customer listening to your show. The higher education marketing show I mentioned has that perfect storm going on. They bring in the CMOs from the big schools, and all the CMOs and the other marketing folks from little schools listen to it every week and know that the company that is running that show not only has the hookup on the best stuff in the industry, but can also help them with implementing that. So they kind of got the double whammy from both ends.
yeah, that's great. Great perspective, and really highlights the value there for sure. And like it
Right.
occurs to me that maybe even if they don't even watch the show, or and they're not on the show, just seeing that it's being posted that's visibility right there.
Exactly, because
Yeah,
there's a much larger audience, Dan, that is on LinkedIn. You might not have you might be getting 3 to 500 downloads a week, which is what that show is getting. But there are thousands, if not more than that, of people on LinkedIn who experience that content in short form. They might not go listen to the whole shooting match, but they may take that particular nugget back to them, especially if they're like a smaller school or something like that, and be like, "Hey guys, I saw this on LinkedIn. We should do this one thing that was done at Old Dominion or Purdue or wherever."
yeah, very interesting. So then, if we could, we kind of touched on a bunch of different topics here. If you could kind of boil all this down into one golden nugget or takeaway for the audience, what would be sort of like your biggest advice for content marketers in this crazy mixed up time of marketing right now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Sometimes there's just a lot to say on that front. But the biggest thing I can tell folks is right now, If you are looking to get into the podcast space for your company, now is a great time. The boom of 2022, 2023 is really gone. There are far fewer podcasts being started today than any time in the last 3 or 4 years post pandemic. There is an opportunity to create a really good show in your niche that stays at the top for a while. The importance of that is that you can likely wrangle an audience simply by being consistent. I just read a statistic the other day that there are 4.2 million podcasts on Spotify. Of the ones that are interview based, only about 13% of them are actively producing an episode every 10 days or so. So do the math on that. Again, now they broke it down, and I can't remember the middle number here of like, 99,000 podcasts that do interviews are out there. They're looking for guests and things like that, and they're doing it on a consistent basis. That was it. That's a lot of shows, but when you realize that there's also 4.2 million people looking to guest on podcasts, that's a big thing too. So the podcast world right now is filled with, I call it the zombie apocalypse, because there's a lot of dead shows out there, and
Mm.
they're still alive, if you will, because you can still go listen to them, but a lot of them haven't produced content in years. And if you're a content marketer who's looking to dominate an industry by creating, number one, a niche podcast for your industry, number two, something that people will actually come back for, I think now might be a real good time. And I'm not just saying that because that's what I do for a business, but because the actual like graph of this is ridiculously low. I can't remember the exact number with it, but it was about an eightfold drop from 2022 of how many podcasts were being started. The bright spot is that those podcasts that are being started today are generally higher quality by a good country mile than the stuff that was being started 2 years ago.
Awesome. Well, hey, that was a lot of great advice, and we did it in record time. Thank you for joining me today on the interview portion or the question portion of this show. What I like to do now is end the show and then do a secret deep dive where we're going to talk about what you're focused on and really the value that you think you can bring to the audience, which we've already kind of touched on. We
Sure.
got to know you now, but if we had to kind of start over from right now in a new clip, how would you want to introduce yourself to the world and how you can add value to this conversation? You are a podcaster first, entrepreneur first. How would you?
Honestly, I'm a salesperson first. That's I am a salesperson who said, you know what, I think I could build something better than you, and I'm going to go do it because I'm going to use my talents to get to that point. But I haven't gotten here alone. That's for sure. There's a lot of people who are really talented with me. But if I were to reintroduce myself and say, I'm Rob, and I firmly believe that the best business relationships and the ones that you think you will never get a hold of can be found with a podcast. And the reason being is because I've seen somebody do this actually, I've seen more than somebody. I've seen many people do this where they are consistent with producing a show at a high enough quality level. They don't have to have scads of guests like Joe Rogan or who's the girl went viral with her silly spitting clip. That girl's got the number 4 podcast in the world right now. You don't have to have audiences like that. If you look and have a highly distilled audience that is of the exact people you want to talk to, it's way more valuable than something that you can sell t-shirts to.
Interesting.
That is, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, actually, Dane. I have a show that I am working with and have worked with for a number of years that interviews the general counsels of Fortune 500 companies. And when they were really consistent with this, they made roughly $2 million in revenue from their podcast. Legit, they were making such good relationships with people that the head lawyer of a company was building a bridge with the CEO of this software provider. And they were able to say, you know what? We're MasterCard. We want to come do business with you. We want to come because you're going to save us a ton of money. And we trust that, you have the best way to keep our legal expenses under control. $400,000 a year for MasterCard for that, which is wild. And that's a recurring thing. So every year, and they've had MasterCard, I think, as a client, probably coming up on their third renewal here. So
Right.
that's tremendous. That's kind of what I would like to preach to the world here is like you can find those incredible clients with the right podcast and by building that and by making that. The trick is that you have to be consistent with it. Those deals between my client and MasterCard, as well as Prudential Financial, and there's one more pharmaceutical company. They totaled like $2 million, but that was over the course of 125 episodes of their show. I did the math, and every time they made an episode, it basically made them $13,000. So consistently making that gets you to the point where you are going to have the ability to pump that guest pool of yours for relationships and for revenue. And at the end of the day, you don't want to see people as dollar signs, but we are all here to be in business at the end of the day. So that's what I would impart to folks, that you should take a look at whether your conquest customers, the big guys, the ones you think you'll never get to pick up the phone or anything like that, think if they'd be open to coming on your podcast, especially if you've got 10, 20, 30, 50 episodes under your belt.
Interesting. So I'm really curious to get your take on like how someone would take that idea, that goal of
Sure.
doing the podcast, and how do they actually put it into practice? Let's just use me an example, because I've just launched my podcast. I've got
Yeah, exactly.
15, 20 episodes recorded. I just launched my first one. So here we go. Right. So
Yeah.
I know that I need to kind of like dial it in on, the format, and probably dial it in a little bit more on the differentiated value of like, what is my specific niche? And I know that it'll get better, but I do think I can do this consistently. This
Mhm.
will live and die effectively on, can I get the right guests, right? And can I create enough value either for them or for the viewers? There has to be. It can't just be me doing this, and just by doing it, it will automatically be successful, right? Or am I wrong?
You are mostly correct.
Okay.
I mentioned that thing in our main interview about not needing an audience, and it's like that can work to a point. I practice what I preach. I make shows with people that I think would benefit from working with us, and they come our way, which is awesome. I don't have a colossal audience for B2B business class at all. Not at all. I think the biggest thing is to do the follow up on that. That is going to be the big key to build that relationship. Because again, this is not seeing people as just checks or dollar signs or things like that. This is taking them and building a relationship with them, whether it's through the podcast is a major piece of that, but then through social media, through remembering things, through wishing them happy birthday on LinkedIn, through sending them an email that is completely unrelated to anything you guys have done in the past, that says, "Hey, John, I was perusing through LinkedIn today, and I saw this article that's about managed IT services, and I remember you saying that there was in our last conversation that there was you had a problem with your payment processor, and this guy, I know this guy and I trust him. I don't know if this is of use to you. Something that's just helpful,
Yeah.
if you will. Be helpful. I think that's a. I recently read a book by Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's his latest one. It's called "Be Useful: 7 Rules for Living." Really great book. I'm going to be implementing that as a must read here at the company.
Right.
But that, I think it sometimes is just doing the show, but also making sure that you have the ability to correctly follow up to build those relationships. And I think that's almost just as important as sitting here recording with somebody 100 times, not with them 100 times, but recording with 100 somebody's
Yeah.
one time and getting that out there. Again, with the statistics I mentioned earlier about how dead the podcast universe is for fresh content, that is, if you can provide something that's really interesting or perhaps novel in this case, you only got to beat, a couple thousand others to have at least a reasonable audience to follow you, number one. And number two, to have people be like, oh, this is a show that updates and things like that.
Yeah. So then, what does that look like as you're talking to a potential customer? Like, what would your advice be for like getting started and saying, "Yeah, I think we can do this consistently, and I think we can follow up." So you got to
Mhm.
kind of make the show first, and then get the people on the show. That's the foot in the door to start the relationship. But then after the show airs, and you tag them on LinkedIn when you post it, you got to have some sort of way of tracking these people after it gets to be 50, 100 people. You're going to need to what, put them in a CRM to kind of like
Yeah, oh, you should have a
manage that
CRM.
relationship
Yeah.
and then nurture them with emails. And do they all get the same emails, or how does that kind of look like for you?
Generally, there are at the beginning of the relationship, it's probably very similar, but they are customized, you know? You can't just be like, the thank you note from this should be, "Hey, Dane, I really appreciated you coming on my show.
Yeah.
It was wonderful to talk to you about" whatever thing is customizable there. "And, I really appreciate the content you brought to me and my listener base. This will be airing on" insert whatever date here, "and look for it on LinkedIn. Here's the assets so that you can share it to your network as well. And I certainly would hope that you do, because that's a way to grow your platform too." Uh, the other side of that is, yes, I think that the initial startup of this, you have kind of two paths. There really isn't a middle here. It's either you've got the financial resources to be like, "I need help and I want this kind of like turnkey," or you bootstrap it. And you bootstrap it completely from almost zero. I've done it myself. It sucks. But it is also the thing that is why I am sitting in front of you today, Dean.
Yeah.
I started my podcast business with 26 bucks.
That's very specific.
A one, a 5, and a 20. Dude, it was all I had left in my wallet after COVID cost me my job, and my wife locked down all the rest of the finances. So
Right.
I opened my wallet, and
There you go.
President Washington, Lincoln, and Jackson are sitting there staring back at me. I said, "Well, this is a pretty limited resource pool." But you know, persevering through that and recording those episodes, they eventually got me that job that was earning me 45 a year at that podcast production company. And again, that was probably undercompensated, which is fine. No shade thrown. It was a different time.
Yeah.
Uh, it was a very welcome thing. And if you have somebody who's in that position, you kind of, I had to do 38 or 40 episodes before I really got picked up and noticed. And they weren't good. They weren't great. But the conversations I started to have branched out my network, not only as just a general professional, but also in my industry and also in other industries that would want to do business with somebody like me, or the company that hired me, or eventually my company. So there's the bootstrap version. Again, it's not easy. It is like I started bootstrapping this on July 30th, 2020. It is almost 5 years later now, and we have not capped 7 figures or anything like that. It still takes a lot of time, and there will be challenges in creating your podcast, because you know what? Other stuff in life comes up. And that's what leads me to kind of lean on the other thing, especially if you're in a business, if you're in a place that has a marketing budget and things like that. You're marking a good portion of that, not all of it or anything like that, but you're marking a portion of that for looking for the right podcast partner to help keep you, number one, on track, number two, plan some content, number three, coach your hosts, number four, worry about all the content production and distribution. That is something to look for. It can be done in a couple ways. There's kind of a sub fork here. You can Fiverr that stuff, or you can find something that's a uh, more boutique-y kind of shop. And I tend to myself kind of lean towards that a little bit. I am not a boutique company at all. I want to make sure that we are fairly priced, but also that we are able to give people stuff that's kind of cool. I'm trying to think like Duluth Trading Company. Not a boutique store, because you don't have $1,700 handbags there. But, a good pair of jeans from Duluth costs 60, $70, or the t-shirt's $30, but you'll never buy that. Like, that t-shirt will last you the next 40 years under heavy wear.
Right.
So you got to find out, who is your ideal podcast partner. And I've done this back and forth thing with my hands a couple times here, so I'm not going to do that this time. But finding out who you can afford and who can do the things that you want them to do. And there's thousands out there.
Yeah.
The greatest example I can give is I had a gentleman come to me probably a month or two ago. He's like, Rob, I like you. I'd like you to potentially do my podcast. It's going to be real edgy because, I'm a veteran, and, we say stuff that, sometimes people find a little bit offensive. And I said, I would just say John in this case. I don't want to out anybody here. I said, John, I would love to produce your podcast, but here's the thing. I didn't serve in the military. So when I'm editing your show, when my team is working on your show, we don't have those points of reference of either the slang or the terms or the understanding between, enlisted and officers and things like that, and why that's, I don't want to say a big deal, but why that's a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Finding your ideal podcast partner is sometimes tricky. And I said to him, I would enjoy doing business with you. I think you're a lot of fun, but I do think that the thing that you need to look for is a veteran owned podcast agency, because they will give you a better product, because they get who you are far better than I ever could, because I haven't served overseas or in
Yeah.
the general branches of the military.
Yeah. So when it comes to like a B2B company looking to do something like this, I've run into the concerns that, like, before they even really fully get on board with the idea that they could do this, they got to have some sense that it's going to come out okay, that it's going to be brand safe. They're not going to look bad. They're going to, hey, is this going to go well? But, until you build it, you don't really know, but you got to have some trust that you can kind of get there. So what sort of conversations do you have to help people get over this idea of, like, what's it going to be? Is it going to be okay?
Well, we work to brand with folks effectively. Like, a lot of times people do like a master brand with their show. It's, the XYZ company presents, So a lot of times you can have a variety of things. There's usually three different types of I guess safety that I offer people when it comes to this. You can have something be master brand, which is super buttoned up, super uptight, super like, we don't say anything that's even remotely controversial. And I'm not talking about, getting political or anything like that, but like, oh, and that was a bad idea by that company. Even if it actually like was a terrible business move, like,
Not wanting
you
to
can
punch
button it up
down,
like
yeah,
that.
or punch up.
Right. You don't want to punch down.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can have something that is uh, an adjacent brand, basically something that is, so and so presents whatever show about your industry, or you can have something that is completely off the wall. And a lot of times, depending on the comfort of your customer, the folks who are real stiff with their brand guidelines tend to like that first one. The folks who are a little bit more loosey goosey tend to like that third one. We find that most people have a brand that complements theirs or sits kind of in the middle, but getting buy-in, especially if you have a larger organization, from executives, from leadership in certain roles, particularly things like CMOs, VPs of business development, CEOs, if they want to get their hands into that, that can be pretty difficult. Just because it's oftentimes sight unseen. So what I usually show to folks is I say, hey, here are other examples of this and how this can sound for you. This is some of our work that best represents what you want to do.
Right. So then, as someone is launching this podcast and they've got some episodes under their belt, and they're looking to
Mhm.
kind of like go after those ideal clients, and they're thinking, hey, I saw someone on LinkedIn that would be perfect for this, but I'm not connected to them. Do you just go for it and invite them to the podcast on the first contact, or do you try and nurture them first, or what's your sort of recommendation for how to handle that? Is it so great that they'll just jump?
You can get some, I mean, there are some folks out there who you can just like, hey, you want to come on my show? And they're like, yeah, sure. I mean, you kind of did that with me,
Yeah.
which is fine. And I will say that probably works 5 to 10% of the time.
Mm,
Especially, there's a couple factors. The newer your show is, the less likely
yeah.
somebody is to pile onto it. But also, if you've got something that's established, that, oh yeah, there's 147 episodes of this. I guess I could be 148. People are vain a little bit. They want to be featured and things like that. They want to borrow your soapbox, if you will. But I think the biggest thing that I preach, and I just did this on stage at the Badass Business Summit down in Fort Worth, Texas, is the consistency. And I have a method that I tell folks to use. This is connected into a HubSpot CRM for me. I use this for my very own company. Is I send 2 emails a day to 2 people who are my prospective customers, but I don't or prospective interviewees rather. I don't do this unless I have made inroads with them on LinkedIn, using LinkedIn Sales Navigator to, number one, find my list of customers, but number two, also distill and narrow down the people that look like I want to work with them, number one. And then number two, kind of vibe checking them with interacting with their content. Are they actually getting stuff back to me when I say, hey, John, that was a really insightful thing you posted about this. Have you considered X, Y, and Z when it relates to this? And again, people will say, oh, we can automate that and AI can help us and things like that. Do it authentically. Please, for the love of God, do it authentically, because people can smell it. People can smell that it is fake. I just had one of my favorite connections today. He showed me a guy who was interacting on his comments thread, but he had some AI script running and it was running the exact same comments on two of his threads. He's like, this dude is completely ungenuine. And then the stupid script literally offers my friend, like, do you want 10,000 leads a day? And he replies back to him, legit, dude, you have asked me this on two separate threads, and I know you're using AI, and I don't know of anybody in the world who would know what the hell to do with 10,000 leads a day. So you have to be authentic in this, and that is what podcasting is all about, especially in B2B, because people do business with people they like, know, and trust. So I usually warm people up with LinkedIn, again, Sales Navigator, into nurturing a connection to eventual connection request to eventual, this is the 2-a-day email here. I spend about an hour or two on LinkedIn every day getting this all sorted and everything like that. But eventually when I think somebody's ready, I move them to that 2-a-day email cadence. And I send out, it's very simple. The template for this is, at last I counted, I think it's 83 words long. And that's the unfilled out template. But it has a little bit of room for me to customize it. And it simply asks, hey, John, I am the host of B2B Business Class. I would love to have you on my show. Here's why. 2-3 sentences. And if you want to listen to it, here's what the show's about. And if you want to listen to it, here's a sample right here. When the time is right, schedule a pre-interview here. Thanks so much, Rob. Very simple.
Yeah.
You can rip these off. I mean, I've got them templated in my Gmail. I can put one of these out in probably a minute and a half.
Yeah.
It is like a 3-minute prospecting trick. But again, you have to build that foundation through social, through other interactions at first. So I would do that. And again, the reason it's 2 a day is because if I do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I have 10 emails sent every week. It doesn't overdo it, but it's still plenty of people that I have a chance to pick from when I get multiple responses. When I send that email, it's about a 50% response rate, and it's about a 50% sure, why not rate. So 2.5 people a week. If you run a weekly show, you will never run out of guests.
Get ahead of it. Yeah. That's
Oh,
great.
totally. And you should get ahead of it.
Yep.
You should get 6 weeks ahead of it.
Hell yeah. And then one thing I was curious what you would advise about is, like, you get your show running and then it starts growing, and then maybe things get a little unmanageable, or you're looking to kind of like take it to the next level. Is it possible for a client to kind of bootstrap it and then kind of come over to work with a company like yours and kind of engage in the middle? Is that a good path?
It is. I think the important thing about that is division of labor. Is who's doing what, who's setting the agenda for the show and who's setting the episode ideas, who's helping people produce, and then who is actually like doing the back end work. My company is primarily one that focuses on helping people on the back end. At some point in time here in the near future, we're going to look into more of the front end to make a better product at the end of the day. But if somebody's coming in the middle and they say, man, this has been really running my team ragged here, but we've got 75 episodes under our belt, figure out what's the trade-off. Is the trade-off for your company who's bootstrapping this going to be working with someone like myself and my team? Do we get 10 hours back in our week because we're not making all the videos, we're not captioning them, we're not writing the blog or doing the social post or whatever it might be? It's what do you want to trade? Oftentimes it's time for money. And you can do that across a variety of ways, and you can do that in a variety of like depths. I would recommend though that if you really want to take some of the pressure off your team, take your post production to somebody who's a podcast partner. Pre production, keep that in house. Keep writing those questions with your host, because that particular thing allows you to keep the content something you're going to be happy about. That is one struggle I see with a lot of companies, is that if they don't plan their content right, their like CMO comes back and he says, "Hey, I really wanted this episode to be about X, Y, and Z." And for me as a post-production partner, I can't make people say things that they didn't say generally. I mean, we can get into AI and deep fakes and things like that, but for the most part, for what you're working with a podcast production partner, we're not going to be able, if you wanted the episode to be about uh marketing to new niches and all you talk about is leadership, you're not going to get that out of there with a podcast partner. So I would say make sure that your super pre-production is either solo handled by your team if you're converting, or that you have a consultant from your podcast partner riding shotgun with you to make sure that they're helping you ask the right questions that are going to get the stuff out of the back end of the machine
Right. Excellent.
after it's all produced.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I feel like this is a handbook waiting to happen. I'm like,
I do plan on actually writing a book about this at some
yeah,
point.
this
It's
feels like something just read it and
books are expensive
yeah,
though.
exactly. Selling paper still happens.
True.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks for doing this, Rob, and
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
really appreciate your time and your wisdom. If people want to get in touch with you, again, this is Rob Conlon, founder of Westport Studios, the B2B podcast production partner. So
Yeah.
that's the plug. And where would be the best place to track you down?
Biggest one is on LinkedIn. I'm on that all the time, like I said earlier. And then, of course, hit us up at westportstudiosllc.com. We just relaunched a new website. Should be a little bit more fun, and love to see you there. And of course, you can always book a little bit of my time to either help you with an existing project. I love, one of my favorite things is to kind of consult on like, hey, I want to start this. Like, does this have legs? Does it not? I call them podcast children. Isn't that like, my shows have begat so many other shows by the advice I've given or the inspiration that has come from them. So I'm always down to talk to folks about what they can do with their shows. Again, whether you're in the hobby space or the B2C space, but especially in the B2B space.
Awesome. Or B2B with D&D.
Absolutely.
All right. That's a wrap, everybody. Thanks again to Rob, and we'll see you next time.